tasks. From your end objective, you basically derive one or more strategies to get there, and from those strategies then you define some tactics or tasks that you have to do to be able to achieve your to be able to execute your your strategy. एक तरीका जो कि obviously I think theory of change जिसको हम कह रहे हैं उसी का एक different name है, उसको कहते हैं उसको कहते हैं results based measurement. लोगों ने especially government PC1 a way that they are measurable, that you and that they are causally linked with each other. So for example, अगर मैं process में, so that input has to be translated into some kind of an output, and the output linked with what I input control. Now when we move from output to outcome, things become more interesting, because output से outcome के दौरान चीजें मेरे हाथ से निकलती जाती हैं. So for instance, मैंने एक scientific project लिया, लेकिन उस scientific project का एक social impact होना था. And before the social impact had to happen, there was supposed to be a coalition that would come together. So for instance, I'm talking about, let's say, an electric vehicle project. I was supposed to solve, as a scientist, I was supposed to solve a major technical problem in the production of an electric vehicle locally. या ये कि मैं उसकी बैटरी के अंदर कोई काम कर रहा था, या मैं उसके बैटरी स्वैप सिस्टम की कोई टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व कर रहा था. वो मेरी आउटपुट थी. मैंने वो टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व कर दी, लेकिन उस टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व करने के नतीजे में आई वाज होपिंग, एंड दिस इज पार्ट ऑफ माय थ्योरी ऑफ चेंज, आई वाज होपिंग that there will be a consortium of electric vehicle providers and charging stations and regulators and government policy makers that will come together, because I have solved a big technical problem. There will be a consortium that will come together, and that consortium will then become the driving force behind the adoption of electric vehicle technology in Pakistan, right? So wo consortium which was supposed to come together as a basis of my being able to solve a major technical problem is not entirely in my hand. Yes, I'm a major driver of that consortium, but I cannot force the government or the regulator or the charging stations or the electric vehicle providers to come together into a consortium. मैं उसको drive जरूर कर सकता हूँ, लेकिन मैं guarantee नहीं कर सकता. So there is a significant risk involved कि मेरा project हो सकता है अपनी outcomes achieve ना कर सके, लेकिन मुझे उन outcomes को clearly lay down करना बहुत ज़रूरी है. ठीक है, तो मैंने अपनी outcomes ये ले की कि as a result of the output that I'm going to produce, a consortium of different players will come together, and that consortium will then drive the adoption of electric vehicle technology in Pakistan, right? I feel कि ये जो outcome है ये मेरे हाथ में शायद 25 to 50% है. ठीक है, by virtue of being a good team of scientists, having solved some major problems of electric vehicle, I have a lot of say in this consortium being together, and as part of the project, I'm actually proposing some tasks and tactics that would help build this consortium. Lekin I cannot totally guarantee that this consortium will come together. So maybe 20 to 25% of output is in my control. The rest of the output is not in my control. And I think I need to lay out the theory of change in a way that this becomes explicit, and in a way that I can then provide alternate ways of making sure and giving comfort to the reviewers कि जो मैं बात कर रहा हूँ ये potentially possible है. अच्छा, जब आप आउटकम से इम्पैक्ट की तरफ मूव करते हैं तो चीजें और ज्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स हो जाती हैं, बिकॉज हो सकता है कि एक कंसोर्शियम भी आ गया, लेकिन अब कंसोर्शियम ने काम शुरू करना है और उस कंसोर्शियम ने ऐसी एनवायरनमेंट बनानी है कि इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल अडॉप्शन हो, राइट? ना उस इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल अडॉप्शन के लिए हो सकता है कुछ और चीज़ें हैं जो उस कंसोर्शियम के हाथ में भी ना, मे बी यू नीड a very strong, government regulation. Maybe you need the cost of, maybe some kind of technology, electric, batteries to come down. Maybe you need the cost of, fossil fuels to go up. And these are factors that are even, not in control of that consortium, which was the outcome of the project. Now, in order for adoption to happen, and impact to be achieved, we need to be able to solve these bigger problems, and these problems are even farther removed from my capability as a scientist, right? But I still have to worry about it because the objective of my project is the adoption of electric vehicle technology in Pakistan to a certain level. I mean, you could say कि मेरा मकसद है कि पाकिस्तान में पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट में 50% जो है वो इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स यूज हो, या मेरा मकसद है कि पर्सनल यूज में X% जो है वो इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स यूज हो। तो जो भी आप अपने प्रोजेक्ट का फाइनल ऑब्जेक्टिव आइडेंटिफाई कर रहे हैं, उस ऑब्जेक्टिव तक पहुंचने के लिए एक पाथवे है। वो पाथवे इनपुट से शुरू होता है और प्रोसेस के शुरू होते हुए आउटपुट पे जाता है। आउटपुट इज प्रोबेबली 95% इन माय कंट्रोल, आउटकम इज प्रोबेबली 50% इन माय कंट्रोल, and impact is probably 15% in my control, right? So you have to sort of, think through this entire chain of, causal chain of, of actions, which together constitute, the theory of change, right? So I think अगर इसको हम इस तरह से सोचें, so it would be really useful. So I'll give you two examples. When I was in the planning commission,
I think we have lost Dr. Attar. So, Dr. Adnan, if you can maybe respond to the questions that Attar was raising actually before.
साउंड गायब हो गई है।
I think Dr. Attar is offline now. So, Dr. Adnan, if you can respond to the questions that maybe Attar was saying, please go ahead. Kindly unmute your microphone.
Yes. I lost part of what Dr. Attar was saying. Can you repeat the question? आखिरी 1-2 मिनट से उनकी आवाज नहीं आ रही। जी Umar, can you repeat the question? बिल्कुल mute पे थे.
Ji Adnan, can you hear us?
Ji, Ab, I can very clearly. But can you repeat the questions?
Just wait for a second. I am letting Athar in. He's left the room by mistake. Ji Athar.
Hello.
Ji Athar.
Sorry.
Can you hear us?
Yes. Sorry, I got booted out, and then I was waiting outside to get in.
Yeah, that was an editorial comment.
Gee, so anyways, I was saying, I don't know at what point did you stop hearing me. Again, I was talking about PC1s and the RBM matrix in PC1. So what I used to do as a policy maker was I used to take out that one page of the PC1, and I used to spend almost like at least more than a month really thinking about कि जो भी हमारा objective है इस particular project से वो किस तरह से achieve होगा. So if you have your objective in mind, you can then trace back and say कि okay, if we start with this set of inputs, what kind of outputs do we need to have? What kind of outcomes would those outputs translate into, and how will it create the impact that I'm trying to achieve? So I was going to give an example. There was a university that came to us to establish a center for mathematical sciences. I won't name the university, but the project was approved. It was one of my first CDWP meetings. The project was approved with the the minister in charge said that, you are one of the best universities that we have. हम आपको ये Center for Mathematical Sciences बनाने देते हैं, and we would expect that in due course you will produce a Nobel laureate in mathematics or whatever, right? Mathematics में Nobel prizes तो नहीं होते, लेकिन you can assume that you can add something, some mathematical input into some Nobel Prize, process. So anyways, with that, the project was approved. That particular, sentence was actually minuted in the decisions of CDWP. After the process was approved, there were some minor revisions that we wanted. So उन minor revisions के लिए वो PC1 मेरे पास आया. जब वो मेरे पास आया, मैंने उसको पढ़ने शुरू किया, तो मैंने रियलाइज किया कि इस PC1 में ऐसी कोई बात नहीं है, उसको पढ़ने से मुझे ऐसी कोई बात नहीं लग रही जिससे मुझे ये श्योरिटी हो एज अ पॉलिसी प्लानर कि 20 साल के बाद मुझे इन पैसों को देने से एक नोबेल प्राइज मिलेगा, राइट? When I looked at the RBM matrix said कि हम 2 साल 4 साल के बाद 20 मास्टर्स के ग्रेजुएट्स प्रोड्यूस करेंगे और 40 बैचलर्स के ग्रेजुएट्स प्रोड्यूस करेंगे. उसमें ग्रेजुएट्स की क्वालिटी का कोई जिक्र नहीं, उसमें आउटपुट outcomes का कोई जिक्र नहीं, impact का कोई जिक्र नहीं, and you could if you didn't know that your objective was defined as winning a Nobel Prize, that you could actually read the PC1 and tell me what the objective was. So I went back to the sponsors and I said कि look, मेरे minister ने तो ये कहा है, मुझे ये चाहिए. And I understand that predicting a Nobel Prize is not a good idea. It is something that nobody openly says that he or she is aspiring for a Nobel Prize. But I want to see that you are at least aspiring for the kind of quality that maybe someday can win a Nobel Prize for me. अच्छा, जब मैंने ये बात की तो एक बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट हो गया, क्योंकि उन्होंने कहा जी हम अगर ऐसी बातें हुकूमती डॉक्यूमेंट्स में अगर लिख देंगे तो कल को जो है ना हमारा एहतसाब शुरू हो जाएगा, लोग हमसे पूछेंगे कि जी आपने जब ये कहा था नोबेल प्राइज, तो नोबेल प्राइज कहाँ है. मैंने कहा चले ठीक है, हम इसको KPIs के तौर पर नहीं लगते, हम इसको लिखते हैं कि ये एक एस्पिरेशनल KPIs है, हम ये एस्पायर कर रहे हैं, एंड वी अंडरस्टैंड दैट इट मे नॉट हैपन, एंड इफ इट मे नॉट हैपन you shouldn't penalize the leaders of that organization, but at least they should aspire to achieve their objective. And I often say कि अगर आपका ऑब्जेक्टिव चांद पे जाना हो, नहीं, अगर आपका ऑब्जेक्टिव मार्स पे जाना हो, तो एटलीस्ट अगर जब तक आप ये अपने मुंह से कहेंगे नहीं कि मैंने मार्स पे जाना है, तो आप मार्स पे कैसे पहुंचेंगे. हो सकता है आप ये कहें कि मैंने मार्स पे जाना है और वो कोशिश करें मार्स पे जाने की, और हो सकता है कि उस प्रोसेस में आप मार्स पे ना पहुंच सकें, लेकिन एटलीस्ट अगर मार्स पे नहीं पहुंच सकेंगे तो चांद पे तो पहुंच जाएंगे ना. लेकिन अगर आपने कभी ये डिक्लेयर ही नहीं किया होगा कि आपका ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है, और आपने उसको एक ऑब्जेक्टिव मेजरेबल ट्रांसपेरेंट तरीके से कभी किसी डॉक्यूमेंट में लिखा ही नहीं होगा, तो फिर तो nobody is going to try to at least even go to Mars. If your objective is kind of wishy-washy, then it's not going to happen. So I think that's an example of how I think a good project should really think through what it is trying to achieve and try to achieve it. I think we should get into a habit of perhaps writing ambitious objectives, stretch objectives, and then work them backwards and try to see कि इस objective को achieve करने के लिए मुझे क्या करना होगा, outcome क्या होगी, उसकी output क्या होगी, और मुझे input क्या चाहिए होगी. I'll give you one more example. So I work with a US foundation जो इसी तरह से जब हमसे projects submit करवाती है तो वो हमसे output मांगते हैं, outcome मांगते हैं और impact मांगते हैं. And every single and they also ask us कि हमें ये भी बताएं कि इस output को achieve करने में जो आपको फर्ज करें हम $2 लाख के ग्रांट दे रहे हैं, तो $2 लाख में कितने % जो है एलोकेशन जो है वो इस आउटपुट को अचीव करने में खर्च हो रही है. आउटपुट ए को कितने कितने % आउट द टोटल मनी खर्च हो रही है, आउटपुट बी को कितना हो रही है, आउटपुट सी को कितना हो रही है, एंड देन सिमिलरली आउटकम 1 एंड इम्पैक्ट 1. So when they first started doing this, तो impact को उन्होंने define किया कि impact is something which happens between 3 to 5 years after the research is completed. तो मैंने बड़ा I was very curious कि ये 3 to 5 years after research completed की मुझसे क्यों बात कर रहे हैं. मेरा प्रोजेक्ट तो 2 साल में खत्म हो जाएगा, 3 साल में खत्म हो जाएगा. जिस दिन प्रोजेक्ट खत्म हो जाएगा उस दिन सारी फाइनेंशियल टेकिंग ओवर भी हो जाएगी. मैंने जितने पैसे खर्च करने होंगे वो मैं कर दूंगा. मैं
Athar, we lost you again.
I think Athar's connection is a little shaky. In the meantime, while we wait for Dr. Athar, Dr. Adnan, we have a few questions. Perhaps you can respond to them.
जी कौन से जो YouTube पे आ रहे हैं?
G, a chat. If you open the chat, you'd see 2 questions I've just posted at the bottom end of the chat. If you look at those 2 questions, maybe you could respond to that.
Chat. I don't see here, but I see a couple of them on YouTube की chat.
G, so you can respond to.
जी, तो एक सवाल ये है कि how can we convert or make unmeasurable to measurable? So again, unmeasurable थोड़ा मुश्किल होता है हमेशा. Unmeasurable क्या होगा? And I'll just take an example कि आप जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल आप कह रहे हैं कि हमने कोई प्रोसेस करने है, उसके लिए हम लोगों को ट्रेन करेंगे और जब लोग ट्रेन हो जाएंगे तो वो ऐसा ऐसा काम करेंगे और वो जब काम हो रहा होगा तो उसकी वजह से हमारी आउटकम. सो अगेन एज डॉक्टर अतर ऑलरेडी सेड कि ये आपको पता होना चाहिए कितने लोग ट्रेन हुए, लेकिन उसके अंदर क्वालिटी, तो आपको थोड़ा सा क्रिएटिवली सोचना पड़ेगा कि ये जो चीज हो रही है इसमें मैं क्या मेजर कर सकता या कर सकती हूँ. हर चीज के कुछ एस्पेक्ट होते हैं जो आप मेजर कर सकते हैं और वो मेजर करना आपको पड़ेगा, बिकॉज अगेन आई वर्क इन अ फील्ड जहाँ पे काफी सालों से नेशनल लेवल पे हमारा कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं हुआ है, और पार्ट ऑफ द रीजन हैज बीन कि पीपल हैव बीन डूइंग थिंग्स जो अनमेजरेबल थी और अनमेजरेबल थी और वो लोग कर रहे थे और बहुत खुश थे कि हम ये सब कर देते, लेकिन उनका कोई या तो थ्योरी ऑफ चेंज मुकम्मल नहीं थी या उनके जो अचीवमेंट थे वो मेजरेबल नहीं थे, मेजर हो भी रहे थे तो वो यस नो में मेजर हो रहे थे कि हमने ट्रेनिंग कर दी, यस टिक लग गया, लेकिन ट्रेनिंग की क्वालिटी कितनी थी, कितने लोग थे, कौन से लोग थे. कभी कभी होता है कि गलत लोगों को आप ट्रेन करा देते हैं फॉर व्हाटएवर रीजन. पब्लिक सेक्टर में काफी होता है कि बिकॉज इट वाज सो डिफिकल्ट टू गेट द राइट पीपल, आपने एक गैस किया या प्रोविंस ने डिस्ट्रिक्ट के कुछ लोगों को नॉमिनेट कर दिया, मुझे जस्ट हैपेंस टू बी कि वो लोग उस काम के ऊपर नहीं. तो मेजरेबल आपको करना जरूरी है, आपको ढूंढना पड़ेगा. जरूरी नहीं है कि हर चीज उस प्रोसेस की मेजरेबल हो, लेकिन कुछ अगर एस्पेक्ट आप कर सकें. एंड अगेन कीपिंग इन माइंड कि वो थ्योरी ऑफ चेंज में फिट होता है, वो क्या आइडिया होने से आपकी प्रोग्रेस होने लॉजिकली एक्सपेक्टेशन है या नहीं है, वो आपको जरूर.
G, Dr. Athar has joined us back. So Dr. Athar, Dr. Adnan was responding to a question from one of the attendees regarding possibly measuring the unmeasurable indicators as far as outcomes and impacts are concerned. If you
I'm so sorry, my my internet is giving me problems today, तो मैं थोड़ी देर बाद internet off हो जाता है. But anyways, I'm just going to close with this. तो मैं एक वो relate कर रहा था, and I think this is a very important point for theory of change. So I told them, I asked these sponsors कि भाई आप मुझसे प्रोजेक्ट के 3 से 5 साल बाद वाली चीजों का को क्यों लिखवा रहे हैं? And they said no, but we want you to write down in paper कि how even though your project ends in 2 years, how things that you are theorizing, that you're working on, will go on between 2 to 3 years and 5 to 10 years after your project finishes. And anyways, because it was part of the proposal, I wrote it down and I gave it to them. And the project started. The project happened in 2 years. We used up all the resources. We gave them accounts. बात खत्म हो गई. लेकिन आज वो project खत्म हुए 5 साल हो गए. Even now, I know that I wrote something down on a piece of paper. I used them, I used some resources, some philanthropist money to try to achieve something, and I wrote down some commitments on a piece of paper. And even today, 5 years after the project is over, I still feel morally committed and obligated to continue to work on what I committed on that piece of paper. And I think this is really important because obviously these are fixed time period projects. GCFs are fixed time period projects. HEC आपको इस बात पे तो कमिट नहीं करवा सकती कि इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल इंडस्ट्री की अडॉप्शन होगी कि नहीं होगी, लेकिन वो इस बात पे जरूर कमिट करवा सकती है कि हैव यू थॉट थ्रू कि आप जो पीस ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करेंगे, उस पीस ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व करने से जो दूसरी प्रॉब्लम्स सॉल्व होंगी या जो कोलिशन बिल्ड होगी या जो कंसोर्शियम पुट टुगेदर होगा टू सॉल्व द बिगर प्रॉब्लम, वो क्या होगा और किस तरह से होगा, राइट? So, some of these impacts that we are talking about in the context of GCF may take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years to happen. But your theory of change, your logic, your cause and effect logic of how that may happen should be there on a piece of paper today. And then we can argue as reviewers, we can argue कि ये जो इसने process define किया है इस change के होने का, ये हो भी सकता है कि नहीं हो सकता. There are people who might say कि ये नहीं हो सकता. There are people might say कि नहीं, I think this is possible. How this PI is defining कि electric vehicles की adoption कैसे होगी या किसी और बड़ी urban problem का solution किस तरह होगा. मैं तो ये piece पे काम कर रहा हूँ, लेकिन मेरा ये piece जाके overall solution में इस तरह fit होगा और मेरे जो भी मैं काम करूँगा उससे ultimate impact इस तरह से होगा. So I think that's something that is debatable. That is something that is the job of the reviewers to look at. But it is your job as a PI, as a proposer of a GCF project, to at least lay down that cause and effect logic on a piece of paper, so that people can say कि ये सही है या नहीं है, ये हो सकता है या नहीं हो सकता, ये feasible है कि unfeasible है, ये बहुत costly है, whatever that thing is. So I think that's how we want you to really think about the theory of change. We also want you to give us a complete implementation plan in the proposal. If this is how I'm going to get from point A to Z, right? There's a B and there's a C and there's a D and F, right? So this is how I'm going to get from A to Z. It should be very clear, within the span of those 3 months. You should also tell us who's doing what, right? So as I said in one of the other presentations the other day, कि हो सकता है आप एक बहुत strongly focused theoretical researcher हो जो कि अपनी लैब में ही काम करना चाहे, लेकिन हमें इस किस्म के प्रोजेक्ट की जरूरत है जिसका इम्पैक्ट हो ग्राउंड पे. तो मे बी यू ब्रिंग ऑन अ co-PI who's of the nature कि उसका काम हो कि वो आपकी लैब रिसर्च को लेकर और फील्ड में जाए और उसको फील्ड में जाके टेस्ट करे, वो कोलिशन बिल्ड करे और उसका इम्पैक्ट प्रोड्यूस करे. तो it is not necessary that every PI would be responsible for taking, not just solving the scientific part of the problem, but also solving the social part of the problem and the policy part of the problem and the coalition building part of the problem. There could be different people in the team who are experts in different parts of the problem, and they should have their KPIs clearly defined. And they should be held accountable for achieving those KPIs. So I think, when you think about building your coalitions, also think about the fact कि ज़रूरी नहीं है कि एक scientific PI ही सारे काम खुद करे. There could be a member on your team whose job is to constantly go and sort of knock at the doors of the regulators or the policymakers or the industry leaders and, sell them the idea of this project through which some kind of a social impact is going to happen, right? Some kind of a policy impact going to happen. So I think I would, stop there. Maybe we can take more questions. Umar, do you have any questions?
So I thought there's a question about, can you give example from real life about DOC?
About?
Theory of change ka real life.
Dr. Athar, we have one more question just came up. Give an example of theory of change from daily life so that one can apply theory of change every day.
Yeah, theory of change बहुत सारी examples हो सकती हैं. I want to, I want to make sure that I maximize my learning during this time of COVID. मैं बाहर तो नहीं जा रहा हूँ. I'm holed up in my house. I want to make sure कि ये 3 महीने या 6 महीने जो हैं ये मैं अपने most productive तरीके से इस्तेमाल करूँ. अब उस process का input क्या है? Maybe I've bought some subscriptions. Maybe I started, buying books on Amazon or some kind of home delivery. Maybe I've started, I've enrolled in some Coursera courses. ये मेरी inputs हैं. Process क्या होगा कि मैंने रोजाना का कुछ time अपनी self development के ऊपर खर्च करना है. तो मैंने जो है एक certain amount of time मैंने Coursera को देना है. एक certain number of courses मैंने process में obviously I will give time. I will read a certain number of pages. मेरे outputs क्या हो सकते हैं कि I want to finish X number of courses. I want to gain some certifications. I want to expand my contacts. So for instance, one of the things that I'm thinking actually since the start of this COVID is कि मेरी LinkedIn पे तो तकरीबन 1900 के करीब मेरे connections हैं. And I hardly know like 200-300 people out of those personally, right? And I've been thinking कि मैं हर रोज बैठ के 10 लोगों को कम से कम मैसेज लिखूं कि I want to get to know you because you are, at the end of the day you are linked into me, and so I want to get to know you so that we can collaborate on something, right? Maybe my output could be कि मैं जो है ना हर रोज जो है 10 लोगों को वो लिखूंगा और उनके साथ कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस करूंगा. मे बी माई आउटकम कुड बी कि उनमें से कुछ प्रोजेक्ट्स क्रिएट होंगे. अगेन आउटकम्स as I said are not entirely in my control. So I'll write to maybe 10 people, maybe 5 of them will reply back, and maybe with those 5 when I'll have a conversation, maybe I'll start some kind of collaboration with 2 of them or 1 of them, and the final impact could be that collaboration ultimately leads to some kind of maybe financial benefit, maybe personal benefit, maybe some kind of professional benefit to me, right? Those are things that are even farther beyond, my control. So again, theory of change is a theory that, puts together all the elements, all the causal elements of how any kind of change can happen. That could be a change in your personal level, that could be a change in your professional, circumstances, that could be a social change, that could be a national change. आप किसी भी process में अगर फाइनल ऑब्जेक्टिव को लेकर और उसको रिवर्स करते करना शुरू कर दें और इनपुट्स तक ले आए तो वो आपकी थियरी ऑफ चेंज बन जाती है. The real thing is whether there is clarity in the process or not, whether there is clarity in your mind, whether the clarity has translated into something on the paper, and also whether you have the ability to actually causally test those linkages. So for instance, ये हो सकता है कि मैं ये सारी एफर्ट लिंक्डइन पे करता रहूं, लेकिन लिंक्डइन वो प्लेटफॉर्म ही ना हो जहां से मुझे professional benefit मिल सके. So I'm just sort of making up this example. Maybe I'm doing this on Facebook, and Facebook is not a professional development platform. Maybe there are people who are fake on Facebook. Maybe people project more than they actually are, and so I'm working very hard on Facebook trying to develop my professional linkages, but I'm doing it all wrong. And so what the theory of change does, when you've explicitly sort of defined theory of change and stages in terms of process, output, outcome and impact, what will happen is as I do more and more of the process, I will not get as much output, or I'll not get as much outcome. And when that happens, we then go back and revisit the theory of change. We say कि वो causal linkages वो जो assumptions मैंने मेरी underlying assumptions थी, जो causal linkages मैंने hypothesize किए थे, वो causal linkages सही थे कि नहीं थे. Maybe I have to revise my chain of causality. Maybe I have to, so that's where you start doing some rethinking about the project. अगर जो चीजें आपने hypothesize की थी X करने से Y होता है, वो अगर Y नहीं होता है तो इसका मतलब है कि इस लॉजिक में कुछ मसला है. इसका मतलब है कि मे बी X करने से Y नहीं होता, W करने से शायद Y हो जाए. So unless you have this whole process laid out, unless you have all this in a measurable format, you won't be able to go back and your project will be over and you will realize कि objective तो achieve हुआ ही. उससे बेहतर ये है कि halfway through the process आपको पता चल जाए कि आपके X करने से Y नहीं हो रहा. So you have to go back and revisit that causal link and maybe start doing W rather than X. So you know that's how, in my mind, theory of change works.
Gee, Dr. Athar, there are a couple of questions. Should I list them down?
Sure.
I've also emailed you the list of 9 questions, but there are quite a few questions where researchers are a bit unsure of the differences between output, outcomes, and impact. So I'm going to cover these questions.
Gee, I think I can take that. So this is a common problem, and as some of you have pointed out, even donors sometimes conflate impacts and outcomes. Strictly speaking, impact is के population level पे कोई फर्क पड़ा. So maternal lives saved is an impact. Using family planning or using a health facility or a good quality health provider is a behavior, and that would be an outcome. That outcome is very likely based on evidence, to lead to the impact of saving maternal lives. That is the difference. So again, does that make sense? Basically, our population level pe lives saved is an impact. Behaviors that directly change लोगों की जो आदतें, thought processes change हो गई that lead to that outcome are all outcomes.
Okay. So the next question, because of increased emphasis by donors in terms of impact evaluation consistent with global practices, people often measure outcomes and refer to it as impact. It's also the same question which you've answered, Dr. Adnan.
Right. So I think it's the same thing. I mean, sometimes क्योंकि donors के ऊपर उनके जो funders होते हैं, उनका pressure आ रहा होता है कि आप impact दिखाएं, तो वो outcomes को higher level outcomes कह के impact कहने लगते हैं, which is technically not correct, मगर आप positive करना पड़ता है. That's not uncommon, but just one of those things in life के आपको पूरा करना पड़ता है. So I think in your mind you should be very clear the impact or outcome के फर्क क्या है. You should be able to iterate. Most of the time आप impact level की पर नहीं जा पाएंगे, लेकिन definitely outcomes to change होगी.
And I think another point, Dr. Adnan here, as you develop this whole results-based chain, one of the key challenges that people face are essentially conceptualizing what are the indicators that you're going to use to measure the outcomes and impact especially. So, उस पे अगर आप कुछ elaborate कर सकते हैं for the audience, I think that would be also quite useful.
So, okay, so I'll use the example that I used earlier. आपने app बनाया जिससे आप लोगों को वैक्सीन के बारे में बताएंगे. तो and you think कि because लोग वैक्सीन यूज करना शुरू कर देंगे, तो लोग बच्चों की जिंदगी, so there will be fewer people who get sick or die. So ये आपकी जो impact है वो ये है कि fewer children dying of vaccine preventable diseases. वहाँ पे जो आपका outcome होगा वो होगा number of parents that now start vaccinating or have their children vaccinated or take their children to be vaccinated. उसकी activities क्या होंगी? उसकी ये होंगी कि actual number of parents that are going for getting their children vaccinated, वो vaccine के visits कितने हो रहे हैं? That's an output. उसकी activity ये होगी कि कितने लोगों को आपने आपको सुना, पढ़ा और समझा, और वो एक एक्टिविटी है. इनपुट इसकी ये होगी कि कितने लोगों तक आपका ऐप पहुंच गया. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So Dr. Athar, there's another question, and typically people working in impact evaluation and monitoring and evaluation activities, they face this issue quite a bit. That, you often work on a project, you deliver the output and you can, achieve some of the outcomes. But when you start measuring the impact, usually impact is something that is measured over a much longer period of time. But when you're doing an impact evaluation at a given point of time after the project has concluded and you have achieved certain outputs, how are you able to make an evaluation of the ultimate impact that project was supposed to deliver at that particular point in time, where the impact usually comes over a much longer period of time. So how do you address this issue when you're evaluating projects and assessing their impact?
So as I said, the example that I gave from this donor who asked me to write impact metrics, even though I knew that wo impact